Mary stood on the porch of her worn farmhouse, the autumn wind tugging at her shawl. She gazed over the cracked, brown fields, once rich with life and promise, now parched and lifeless. Her children played quietly at her feet, their laughter thin, their small hands clutching worn toys. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but they did not complain. They did not yet understand the weight of despair pressing down on their mother. Her mind raced through weeks of failing crops, empty pantry shelves, and unpaid bills. The thought of selling the farm, the land her late husband had worked so tirelessly, felt like giving away her heart. Yet there was no choice. If she did not, her children would go hungry. The townsfolk whispered behind closed doors. Mary could almost hear the pity and judgment in their hushed tones. She swallowed the lump in her throat and promised herself she would do whatever it took to keep her family alive, even if it meant sacrificing the home she loved. Night fell, cold and relentless, and she lit the lanterns in the cabin, their flickering glow reflecting her weariness. She tucked the children into bed and sat alone at the table, staring at the fading photograph of her husband. Memories of laughter and life filled the small cabin, a stark contrast to the bleak silence that now enveloped them. The wind howled through the broken boards of the barn, carrying with it the scent of dust and despair. Mary's fingers trembled as she folded the papers, deeds, bills, notices of impending foreclosure, a tangible reminder of her failure. Her heart ached at the thought that soon, these walls, these fields, this farm that held the legacy of her family, would belong to someone else. She had given everything to keep her children alive, and still, it felt like she had nothing left to give. She did not notice the first rays of dawn filtering through the cabin window until the children stirred, hungry eyes seeking comfort and reassurance. Mary held them close, whispering promises she barely believed herself. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the dust and despair, she prayed for a miracle. Little did she know that someone had already begun riding toward her farm, bringing with him the chance to restore not only her home but the hope she thought she had lost forever. The morning sun had barely risen over the rolling ridges of the Arizona plains when Rhett Callahan tightened the cinch on his saddle. His ranch stretched farther than the eye could see, acres of grassland, grazing cattle, windmills turning slowly in the calm dawn breeze. It was the kind of land most men spent their lives building. Rhett had done it quietly, steadily, without asking much from anyone. He swung into the saddle just as his foreman, Tom Larson, rode in from town with dust clinging to his coat. Rhett could tell from Tom's expression that the news he carried wasn't ordinary. "Morning, Tom," Rhett said, adjusting his hat against the sun. "You look like you rode through a storm." Tom hesitated, then spoke with a regretful sigh. "It's Mary Stanton, the widow. She's selling her farm." Rhett froze. For a moment, the breeze, the cattle, the rustling grass, all of it seemed to fall silent. "Selling?" he repeated. "Why?" Tom looked down. Crops failed. Bills piled up. "Heard she's got no food left. Folks say she's been skipping meals to feed her youngins." Rhett swallowed hard. He knew Mary. Had known her before the grief, before the hard years had carved shadows beneath her eyes. She had been strong, lively, full of laughter once. Jake Stanton, her late husband, had been one of the few men Rhett respected without hesitation. They had ridden together in cattle drives, worked side by side in times of storm and drought. And when Jake died in that accident, Rhett had meant to check in on Mary more. Meant to help. But seasons passed, work piled up, and somehow, the promise he made at Jake's graveside, "I'll look after them if they ever need me," drifted further from reach. Guilt churned in his chest like a heavy stone. "When's the sale happening?" Rhett asked quietly. "Today," Tom replied. "She's meeting with the buyer before noon. Some land broker from Tucson. Man doesn't care who lives on it, just wants the property." Rhett's jaw tightened. He looked toward the horizon, toward Mary's distant farm, barely visible as a faint line against the dusty light. A widow's farm, children going hungry, a promise forgotten. He didn't need to think any longer. "Tom," he said, already turning his horse's head, "run the ranch for the day. I'm riding out." Without waiting for a reply, Rhett dug his heels into the horse's sides and took off across the plains, dust rising behind him as he pushed his stallion faster. His heart pounded with urgency, with determination, with the bitter knowledge that he might already be too late. But he would not let her lose everything, not if there was anything he could do to stop it. Not this time. Far ahead, Mary was preparing to sign away her home. And Rhett was racing toward her with a decision that would change both their lives forever. By late morning, the sky had turned a pale, unforgiving blue over Mary Stanton's small, weather-worn farm. The windmill squeaked as it turned, the only sound in a yard that once echoed with her children's laughter. Now it stood quiet, almost holding its breath, as if the land itself knew what was about to happen. Mary smoothed the front of her faded dress, though it did little to hide how thin she'd grown. Days of skipping meals had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones, but she held herself tall, refusing to let the moment crush her. Her children, Emma and Luke, watched her from the porch steps, their faces pinched with worry they were too young to understand yet too old to ignore. A dust-covered wagon rolled up the path, stopping in front of the house. The land broker from Tucson, Mr. Hollis, climbed down with a stiff suit, a pencil-thin mustache, and a folder tucked under one arm. Everything about him seemed out of place, the shiny boots, the crisp hat untouched by dirt, but Mary clasped her hands to keep from trembling. "Mrs. Stanton," he greeted, glancing briefly at the house, then at the thirsty crops that hadn't survived the summer. "I appreciate you meeting me early. These papers are ready for your signature." His voice was businesslike, impatient, as though he were here to collect a parcel rather than a woman's entire world. Mary nodded politely. "Let's get it done." They walked to the small table she had set outside beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, the very spot where she and Jake once sat to watch sunsets after long days of work. She felt the ghost of his presence, the warmth of his hand resting over hers as he used to. "Jake, I'm sorry," she thought, blinking against the burn in her eyes. "I tried." Mr. Hollis opened the folder and laid out the contract. The pages fluttered in the wind like restless birds. "Just sign here, here, and here," he said, tapping each spot with a pen. Mary looked down at the paper. Her farm, her home, Jake's legacy, all boiled down to black ink and legal lines. She swallowed, her throat painfully tight. Her fingers shook as she picked up the pen. "If I don't do this," she reminded herself, "the children won't eat next week." She touched the pen to the first line. At that moment, a small hand slipped into hers. Emma, her daughter, looked up with wide, wet eyes. "Mama, if we sell it, where will we go?" Mary's breath hitched, but she forced a gentle smile. "Someplace better, sweetheart. Somewhere I can take care of you." Emma nodded, though fear lingered in her gaze. Mary squeezed her hand, then turned back to the page. The pen pressed down. A distant thunder rolled across the plains. Hoofbeats. Fast, urgent. Mary paused, frowning as she looked toward the horizon. A rider was tearing across the landscape, dust rising behind him like a storm cloud. Her heart knocked once, hard, as she recognized the silhouette, broad shoulders, familiar seat in the saddle, riding as though the land itself needed saving. Rhett Callahan. The pen slipped slightly in her hand. Mr. Hollis glanced up. "Friend of yours?" he asked, annoyed by the interruption. Mary didn't answer. She couldn't. Rhett was already closing in, his horse lathered, his eyes locked on her, determined, fierce, carrying a purpose she couldn't yet name. And for the first time in weeks, a spark of something warm flickered inside her chest. Hope. Rhett Callahan reined in his horse so sharply that dust rose in a swirling cloud around him. His boots hit the ground before the animal had even stopped moving. His hat was tipped low, shadows cutting across the hard lines of his face, but Mary saw the fire in his eyes the moment he strode toward her. She froze, her hand still hovering above the contract. "Mary," he said, breathless from the ride. "Don't sign that." Mr. Hollis stiffened. "Sir, this is illegal." Rhett didn't spare the man a glance. His focus was fixed entirely on Mary, on the tremble in her fingers, on the worry etched around her eyes. "Don't do this," he said softly. "Please." Mary felt her voice catch in her throat. She forced herself to stand straighter, to summon the strength that had kept her going all these months. "Rhett, I don't have a choice." "You do." His voice was low, steady, carrying the kind of certainty she'd run out of. "You don't have to sell the only thing you and Jake built together." Hearing Jake's name spoken aloud made the wind feel colder. She looked away, blinking fast. "I can't feed the children. I can't keep the farm running. The well is dry, the crops are gone, and I'm out of time." Rhett stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine dust clinging to the stubble on his jaw. "You should have come to me." Mary shook her head. "You've already helped enough." "No," he whispered. "I haven't, not nearly enough." Mr. Hollis cleared his throat loudly, tapping the contract with his finger. "Mrs. Stanton, we were in the middle of—" Rhett's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a drawn blade. "Back off." Hollis faltered, adjusting his tie, muttering under his breath about improper conduct and interference. But Rhett had already turned back to Mary, lowering his voice again. "You're not selling this place," he said firmly. "Not today, not ever." Mary felt something inside her wobble, threatening to collapse. The wall she'd built, the quiet despair she carried, the belief that she had to face everything alone. Rhett reached out slowly, gently taking the pen from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, warm and steady. "Let me help you," he murmured. "You don't have to drown trying to stay afloat." She swallowed hard. "Rhett, I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." His eyes softened, a rare vulnerability flickering there. "You never have been." The wind rustled the cottonwood leaves above them. Emma and Luke watched from the porch, hope blossoming across their young faces like morning light breaking through clouds. Mary looked down at the unsigned contract. The paper suddenly felt heavier than any weight she'd carried. Rhett took a deep breath. "I'll buy the farm back." Mr. Hollis blinked. "Buy it, sir, she hasn't signed." "From her," Rhett said, jaw tightening. "Not from you, and I'm paying full price." Mary's eyes went wide. "Rhett, no, that's too much." "It's not too much for you." Something inside her cracked, not in pain, but in relief. In disbelief. In the faint, fragile stirring of something she hadn't felt since before Jake died. Rhett's voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "You're not losing your home," he told her. "Not while I still have breath to help you keep it." And for the first time in months, Mary felt the ground steady beneath her feet. The sun dipped low across the fields, laying long amber shadows across the tired land. Mary stood at the edge of her porch, fingers digging into the railing as Rhett sent Mr. Hollis away with a few sharp, unshakable words. The man sputtered, tried to push back, but Rhett's steady stare made him retreat to his buggy and disappear in a trail of dust. Silence fell over the yard, deep and heavy. Mary released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Rhett turned toward her, his frame outlined by the fading glow. He didn't rush to speak or fill the quiet. He simply watched her, making sure she was steady, present. Mary stepped off the porch, skirt brushing the dry ground. "Rhett, you didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said softly. "I did." The firmness in his voice wasn't force, it was protection. A kind she hadn't felt in a long time. She tried to smile. "You shouldn't be spending that kind of money on someone else's trouble." He stepped closer. "These aren't just your troubles, Mary. Not anymore." Her breath faltered. He didn't touch her, but the space between them warmed, alive with something she hadn't let herself feel since before the world fell apart. "The farm needs more than a paid-off debt," she said. "The well's failing. The soil's tired. Rhett, this place is dying." "Then we bring it back," he answered simply. "It's not that simple." "It can be," he said, "if you let me help." She searched his face, hunting for pity, obligation, guilt. But Rhett was not a man who gave help for the sake of easing his conscience. His voice dropped to a gentler timbre. "Mary, I didn't buy this place for me. I bought it so you wouldn't lose it." Shock softened her features. "I'm not taking your home," he said. "I'm giving it back to you." Her hands shook. "I can't accept that." "You can," he whispered. "And you should." A breeze swept a loose strand of hair across her cheek. Rhett almost brushed it away, stopping just before touching her, waiting for a permission she wasn't ready to name. "The kids deserve this land," he said quietly. "And you deserve a life that isn't built on fear." She swallowed hard. "Rhett, why would you do this?" "Because you mattered long before you ever asked for help," he said. "And because this family deserves someone who won't walk away." Mary didn't look away. For the first time in a long time, her heart steadied, not falling, not breaking. Just held. Night settled slowly over the ranch, draping the land in a soft, blue hush. The children had long retreated inside, whispering excitedly about Rhett's boldness, about the farm no longer being taken from them. Their small footsteps faded into the back room, leaving Mary and Rhett standing in the quiet yard beneath a rising moon. Rhett didn't push her toward the house or toward conversation. He simply stood beside her, arms crossed loosely, as though keeping watch. The air smelled of cooling earth and the faint sweetness of dry grass, a smell that had once meant comfort to her. Lately, it had only meant fear. Until tonight. Mary finally spoke. "You didn't have to stay." Rhett's voice was low. "I know." "Then why are you still here?" He shifted slightly, boots scuffing the dirt. "Because I didn't want you facing the night alone." Those words settled into her like warm water, slow and disarming. She turned toward the porch and motioned for him to follow. Inside, the house was dim, lit only by the glow of the hearth where embers pulsed quietly. Mary knelt to add another log. Rhett crouched beside her without a word, handing her a small split piece of kindling. Their fingers brushed, barely, but enough to send a trembling awareness through both of them. She sat back on her heels. "Rhett, I don't know how to accept what you've done." He studied the flame, not her. "Then don't accept it tonight. Just rest." The fire crackled softly. Shadows danced across the worn walls. Mary wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the exhaustion of the last month's tugging at her bones. Rhett's voice came again, quieter now. "When Jake died, I thought someone would step in. A neighbor, a friend, the town." He paused. "But no one did. You carried everything alone." Mary blinked hard, throat tightening. "You deserved better," he finished. She swallowed. "Rhett, I tried. I really did. But I've failed this land. I've failed my children." His head turned sharply. "No. You kept them fed. You kept them warm. You kept going when anyone else would have broken." His voice steadied. "That's not failure, Mary. That's strength." Her breath shook. She hadn't expected kindness to hurt like this, not because it wounded her, but because it revealed how empty she'd felt for so long. Rhett stood then, gently offering his hand to help her rise. She hesitated, then took it. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was a promise, steady, warm, and real. A promise she didn't know she'd been desperate for. And as the firelight flickered across her tired face, Mary realized Rhett Callahan wasn't just helping her survive the night. He was helping her remember what it felt like to be worthy of gentleness. Worthy of being seen. Worthy of being fought for. Tomorrow would bring hard decisions. But tonight, she allowed herself to breathe. Morning came quietly to the Callahan ranch, arriving not with fanfare but with a soft wash of gold across the parched fields. A thin mist hovered low to the ground, carrying the scent of dew, something Mary hadn't smelled in months with the drought choking the land. Inside the house, the fire had burned low, leaving warm embers and a faint orange glow where Rhett had kept watch most of the night. Mary stirred from the small sofa, pulling a quilt tighter around her shoulders. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Rhett. He sat in the old rocking chair near the hearth, hat tipped forward, arms folded, boots stretched out before him. He hadn't slept, or if he had, it was only in brief, guarded dozes. He looked like a man who'd stood guard over a battlement. Only his battlement was her and the two sleeping children in the next room. Mary rose quietly. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet, and Rhett's eyes opened instantly, clear, alert, softening the moment they found her. "Morning," he said, voice husky with the edge of fatigue. "You stayed the whole night?" He shrugged lightly. Didn't see a reason to leave. Warmth spread through her chest, fragile but undeniably there. She moved to the stove, her movements slow but steady. "I can make coffee, or try to, at least. Haven't been able to afford beans for months." Rhett stood, walked past her, and pulled a small sack from his saddlebag near the door. "Already handled." Mary stared at it. Real coffee, the real smell of it drifting upward as he set it on the table. She blinked fast, fighting the foolish sting of tears. "Rhett, you can't keep giving us things." He met her gaze evenly. "It's coffee, Mary, not charity." But it wasn't the coffee. It was the way he said her name, steady, patient, as if it meant something worth protecting. Luke and Emma appeared in the doorway then, hair tousled, eyes still fogged with sleep. When they saw Rhett, their faces lit with a joy Mary hadn't seen in them in too long. "Mr. Callahan, you stayed," Emma said, nearly bouncing. Rhett smiled. the kind of smile that softened the hard-set lines of his rugged face. "Someone had to make sure your mama didn't chase me off with a broom." Mary laughed, a short, surprised sound she didn't remember making in months. As they gathered around the table, something quiet and miraculous unfolded. Mary felt herself returning to her own skin. The children felt safe enough to giggle again. And Rhett, sitting beside them with that quiet steadiness, felt less like a visitor, and more like a man who belonged in this house, long before he ever stepped inside it. Outside, sunlight warmed the earth, and a breeze shifted through the dry grass, a small whisper that maybe, just maybe, this land could come back to life. Just like Mary. Just like her family. One morning at a time. Morning chores had a rhythm to them, quiet, steady, predictable. For years, Sarah had done them with a seriousness born from necessity. There had been no time for silliness, no room for mistakes, no space for lightness. But that morning, something shifted. Luke was in the barn splitting kindling, and Sarah had stepped inside with a basket of fresh linens, trying to ignore the way the sunlight caught on the dust motes and painted the place almost golden. Her children played nearby, chasing each other around the fence, their giggles drifting like warm wind. Luke set down the axe and wiped his brow. "You work too hard," he said. "So do you," she answered. "I'm a rancher," he said with a shrug. "It's all I know." "I'm a mother," she replied. "Same thing, just different tools." He chuckled. Soft at first, then fuller, like a sound he hadn't used in a while. Sarah blinked at him. She couldn't remember the last time a man had laughed in front of her without mocking or belittling her. Luke's laugh was warm, genuine, disarming. She shifted the basket on her hip, pretending not to notice the way it made her heart stir. "Here," Luke said, stepping closer, "let me help with that." "I can manage," she insisted. "I know," he said, taking the basket anyway. "But you don't have to manage everything alone." Before she could protest again, the oldest child, Hannah, ran up carrying a small, lopsided bundle wrapped in cloth. "Ma," she said breathlessly, "look what Thomas made." Thomas, the middle child, appeared behind her with a guilty grin. "It's supposed to be a scarecrow," he mumbled. Sarah opened the bundle, and burst out laughing. It was a scarecrow. Sort of, more like a stuffed rag doll with mismatched buttons and a crooked stitched-on smile that made it look permanently confused. Luke leaned over her shoulder. "Well now, that's the handsomest scarecrow I've ever seen." Sarah shot him a look. "Be kind." "I am," he protested, trying not to grin. "He's got character. That's worth more than good stitching." Thomas puffed up proudly, and Sarah tousled his hair. The laughter seemed to echo through the barn, bouncing off the rafters, filling spaces that had long been hollow. Even Sarah felt her shoulders drop, tension she didn't realize she held sliding away. For a small moment, no farm debts, no hunger, no fear, no weight of the world. Just a woman, her children, a rancher with kind eyes, and a scarecrow so crooked it made everyone smile. Luke gently set the linen basket down, his voice quieter now. "It's good hearing you laugh, Sarah." She felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "It's been a long time." He looked at her with something soft, something unspoken but unmistakable. "Well," he said, "you should do it more often." And for the first time in months, maybe years, Sarah believed she just might. The sun sank behind the hills, streaking the sky with orange and violet, turning the clouds into embers fading in a dying fire. Evening always brought stillness to the ranch, a quiet Sarah had once dreaded because it left space for memories she'd rather forget. But tonight felt different. Luke had stayed after chores, repairing a broken hinge on the back door, while the children washed up for supper. The soft scrape of his tools, the hum of his movements, it blended with the sounds of home in a way that eased her chest, a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. Sarah stirred the stew on the stove, glancing toward him. "You don't have to fix everything," she called softly. He didn't look up. "Not fixing everything. Just the things that shouldn't stay broken." She swallowed. The words sank deeper than she expected. When he finished, he tested the hinge twice, wiped his hands, and stepped inside, hat low, eyes adjusting to the lamplight. She turned and almost brushed against him. Both froze. The faint scent of soap and dust lingered in the air, grounding her in the moment. "Kids," Sarah called, flustered. "Supper's ready." "Hannah," Thomas and Emma came barreling in, laughter and chatter filling the kitchen. Luke smiled, a warmth in his expression, as if he belonged there, not just as a guest, but as part of the family. Sarah served the stew. Luke reached to steady the pot, their hands brushing briefly, sending a flutter through her chest. "Stay for supper," she said before thinking. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "You've worked hard. It's nice having someone at the table again." Luke's eyes softened. "I'd be honored." They ate simply, quietly, the children's voices filling the home with life. Sarah watched him, the gentle way he spoke, how he treated her children, how he made the farmhouse feel alive again. After the dishes were cleared and the children asleep, she realized Luke wasn't just helping. He was becoming a place of safety, a source of warmth, a presence she both feared and needed. As he stepped onto the porch, hat in hand, he paused. "Sarah?" She met his gaze. "Thank you for letting me be here," he said softly. "You're always welcome, Luke," she whispered. He held her gaze a moment longer, then tipped his hat and stepped into the cool night. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, hands trembling with the truth she'd finally allowed herself to feel. She was beginning to depend on him, and maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to fear it. Dawn broke slowly across the ranch, spilling pale gold light over the fields and the weathered wooden fences. The air smelled of dew, earth, and the faint tang of pine. Sarah stepped onto the porch, wrapped in her shawl, and watched as the first rays kissed the tops of the hills. Luke was already outside, guiding the children as they tended the small garden, teaching them to water the seedlings carefully, pointing out which plants needed extra sun. His voice was gentle, patient, and confident, the kind that made you believe even the smallest hands could nurture life. Sarah felt a swell in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and a quiet wonder she hadn't felt in years. This place, these people, was becoming more than a home. It was a future. Luke looked up and caught her gaze. The sunlight caught the lines of his face, highlighting the warmth in his eyes. He gave her a small nod, the kind that carried reassurance without words. She stepped down to join him, her skirts brushing the dew-soaked grass. Her children ran ahead, laughing and calling out for her attention, their voices bright and unburdened. For the first time in months, Sarah felt free from the heavy weight of despair she'd carried. Luke handed her a watering can, and together they moved through the garden, side by side. Their hands brushed occasionally, small sparks of connection that didn't need words. She realized, as she watched him guide her children, protect the land, and quietly stand by her, that he had become more than a helper, more than a friend. He had become her anchor. "Sarah," he said softly, kneeling to adjust a bent tomato stalk, "this place, it's yours. Always has been. And now, we make it ours, together." Her throat tightened. She nodded, tears glimmering in the corners of her eyes. "Together," she whispered, letting the word carry the promise of hope. The children ran past, giggling, and she laughed, a real laugh, unburdened and light. Luke's hand found hers, brushing their fingers together gently. It was a touch full of care, trust, and something tender that had grown between them silently over these weeks. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the ranch, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that life could be kind, that love could find her again, that home was more than a place, it was the people who chose to stay. Luke squeezed her hand. She looked up, met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't fear the future. She welcomed it. The wind rustled through the trees, the children's laughter echoed across the fields, and Sarah felt the weight of the past fall away. She was not alone. She had hope. She had a family. And with Luke beside her, she had a new beginning. Together, they turned toward the rising sun, ready to face whatever life had in store, hearts steady, hands clasped, and spirits unbroken.